All right, we're going to be talking today about why breeding Amano shrimp is quickly becoming the new normal in 2026. Now, after speaking to several local and some national level fish stores that both sell aquarium fish locally and ship aquarium fish, a lot of them are selling out on Amano shrimp. Most of them can't even get Amano shrimp in colors like we see here in the video. And I think a combination of those two things, some hiccups in the supply chain with tariffs and shipping delays, and just the low amount of breeders of colorful Amano shrimp specifically, we're going to see an uptick in hobbyists that start raising the baby Amano shrimp that are being born in their community aquariums automatically. You see, if you own Amano shrimp, even regular wild type Amano shrimp, not just the colorful types we see here in the video, they automatically breed in your aquarium. You're going to end up with pregnant Amano shrimp like you see here in the video. These are snow white Amano shrimp, and these snow or snowball shrimp were previously only seen in Neocaridina shrimp. To have a white shrimp who is just plumb full of eggs like this that look like little tiny snowballs, this was something that you could only achieve with Neocaridina shrimp until recently. This new form of Amano shrimp became available in the aquarium hobby. But the challenge is there is only a few people in the world that are raising these Amano shrimp once they have their larvae in freshwater aquariums. So it's kind of an easy step to go from just owning a mono shrimp and they're constantly kicking out hundreds, if not thousands, of little baby Amano shrimp at a time into your aquariums, to taking that next step, to taking the dive into raising those baby Amano shrimp. Now, up until I came to the scene, the only thing that we really knew about breeding Amano shrimp and raising the Amano shrimp larva was that it was really complicated. All we knew is that it was hard to do. There was some magical mix of brackish water that you had to have a special recipe for, or some kind of expert insider knowledge to know how to mix up the water to transition your baby Amano shrimp into. And even then, it was complicated. The process of collecting the baby Amano shrimp from your aquarium and how exactly to transition them into that saltwater mix was something that you needed an advanced biology degree in to figure out. Well, now I'm here and I'm showing you that someone with, I would say, average level intelligence like myself can very easily breed a mono shrimp. I figured out a way to do it using regular hobbyist methods. And what I mean by that is very simple, easy to reproduce methods of raising all of those tiny little eggs you see. I know you see that pregnant Amano shrimp. She can barely keep those eggs contained under her tail. There's so many of them. And these Amano shrimp, just one female Amano shrimp, can produce more than enough baby shrimp for your whole fish room. You'll be sharing a mono shrimp with your friends. You'll be trying to convince your family members to start up an Amano shrimp tank. You'll be trading in a mono shrimp at your local fish store or maybe at your hobbyist level clubs, or even selling them to your local fish stores or selling them at auction at these local clubs. Just from one female Amano shrimp. Now, most of us don't have just two Amano shrimp. We don't have just a single male and a single female. Most people get a lot of Amano shrimp because they want maximum algae control. That's what these shrimp are known for, is they eat more algae than anything else in the aquarium hobby. So you'll notice here, I've got a little tiny Neocaridina shrimp in there. See him getting run over and bulldozed out of the way by these Amano shrimp. It's kind of dark here. He swam off towards the back, but these Amano shrimp get much larger than Neocaridina shrimp, and they live for much longer than Neocaridina shrimp. Now let's move over here to another Amano shrimp breeding tank that I have set up. That's right, these little 2.5 gallon nano tanks that you see here. This is a $12 aquarium. I think the price may have gone up now with tariffs and everything, closer to maybe $15. But this is a simple Aqueon open top aquarium. And the reason I say open top doesn't mean that there's no lid. There's a lid on here. See, I've got a little lid on here. But they call them Aqueon open top aquariums when they go on sale for 50% off at the big box stores. And everyone can agree that buying one of these 2.5 gallon aquariums, or maybe a 5 gallon, a 10 gallon, even a 125 gallon aquarium, most of us will wait for these special half off sales that seem to happen every other month or maybe quarterly at the big box stores. Well, the cost of admission to start your own little nano tank with just 3 or 4 or 5 Amano shrimp and completely fill your fish room with algae eating Amano shrimp, whether it's wild type, whether it's the sun orange Amano shrimp, maybe it's the lemon yellow Amano shrimp. The price of admission is under $20. You don't need a substrate if you don't want to have a substrate. You could use substrates from your other aquariums. Maybe you've got some extra substrate laying around. Now, I used a dark colored aqua soil in my adult breeder tanks specifically because it gives the shrimp a lot of contrast and it kind of makes it look a little fancier, in my opinion. But you could do this with a bare bottom aquarium. It would make it much easier to remove the detritus or the mulm or shrimp poop, because these Amano shrimp are aggressive eaters and they're also aggressive waste producers. So let's talk about setting up your very first Amano shrimp breeding aquarium. Now, this is different than, say, a community aquarium, which is what we have here. This is a big community aquarium that has multiple different kinds of nano fish in there, and it has a ton of Amano shrimp in there. Now, you can keep your Amano shrimp with fish, but it's very important that you remove the female before she has the babies, because these babies are a lot like brine shrimp. They're filter feeders, they're planktonic, meaning they swim around in the water column. They don't run and hide. They have no defense mechanisms, and your fish will quickly eat all of your baby Amano shrimp. So you can keep your adults in a community aquarium and simply separate a female into one of these smaller nano tank setups once you notice that she is full of eggs. Like we'll see some in here already that are just full of eggs under their tail. It's very easy to notice when this happens in your aquarium. When these female Amano shrimp become pregnant, it's something that you can spot from far away. And so once you notice that your female Amano shrimp has those eggs, there's no reason for her to be in there with the males anymore at that point. And if you want, you can move her to just a simple small container. You can use a critter keeper, you can use a spare aquarium, or like I said, if you've got the cash, for under $20, you can get one of these 2.5 gallon setups here. You'll notice that I do not have any air hooked up to the sponge filter. and you don't have to worry about pre-cycling a aquarium for your female Amano shrimp. Or even in this case, when I added these 5 adult Amano shrimp to this aquarium, I wasn't necessarily concerned about cycling it. Now, you want to make sure to have some plants. The plants are going to do multiple things for your Amano shrimp. The first thing they're going to do is provide food to your Amano shrimp. The plants naturally are going to have pieces of them that slowly decompose as new pieces of the plants grow. The plants are not internal, they don't just live forever. Pieces of the plants are constantly going to be breaking off or they're going to be dying off as other parts of the plants grow. And your Amano shrimp love to consume pieces of decaying organic matter, like plants. The other thing that's also going to do is as those organic materials, like the pieces of the plants or even these shrimp's waste itself, as they are broken down by bacteria in your aquarium, it releases nutrients. So those nutrients over time can build up. The most common form of this process that we see in our aquariums where nutrients get broken down by decomposer bacteria and released into the water column is the nitrogen cycle. Everyone knows about cycling an aquarium. Now, the reason that I say it's not that important to pre-cycle an aquarium before you add a couple shrimp, right? We're not talking about a full community tank. We're not talking about adding 20 shrimp to a 2.5 gallon aquarium. We're talking about adding one pregnant female or maybe a group of 5 Amano shrimp. If you're not overfeeding this aquarium, the Amano shrimp are not going to produce enough nutrients to where there's going to be this hard crash of the cycle. Now, this is just in my own experience. Typically, you're not going to see that front end giant rays of nitrites or nitrates or anything like that if you've got plants in your aquarium with just a couple of shrimp. Now, if you're only doing shrimp in the aquarium, you might see that. So, your best bet is not worrying about pre-cycling your aquarium. There's some channels out there right now that are preaching about 2 month cycles for an aquarium before you add shrimp. You do not need to do that. Now, one thing I do recommend that you have on hand is Seachem Prime. Prime will counteract any spikes in nitrites or nitrates. It doesn't remove them from the water. But if you find yourself in that initial setup in the aquarium where you are having some kind of major spike of anything, simply adding prime once a day while those nutrients are finding balance, it neutralizes those high nitrites or high nitrates so that they don't affect your livestock. So that's a really easy thing you can have on standby. But in my experience, setting up a tank with just 5 shrimp like this, I've not had any problems. Again, don't go off what happens in my tank. Just take this information and keep it in mind because every aquarium is different. So when you set up your Amano shrimp tank, you want to make sure that you have males and females. And with the wild type Amano shrimp or even the sun orange Amano shrimp, there are some ways that we can tell if these shrimp are male and female based on their markings. Now, on the white, like snow white Amano shrimp or the yellow, the lemon yellow Amano shrimp, they don't have these dots and dashes on their sides. So we can't use the yellow or the white shrimp's markings to determine if they're male and female. And I'll show you that next. But first, let's look at these sun orange Amano shrimp and we'll look specifically at their markings. Let's get a little closer here. So this particular shrimp towards the front of the aquarium, you'll notice that its markings are pretty much circular. Now there is in the middle there on its side, you'll notice that some of them are a little bit more like dashes than a dot. But what we don't see is any real lines to those markings. Most of them look like dots or short dashes. This one here, we've got the same thing. Now there's a line of the digestive tract, but we're talking specifically about the markings on the shrimp there. So that's how you'll find with your wild type Amano shrimp or the sun orange Amano shrimp. If you're not able to just look at the shrimp and tell by the body shape of the shrimp, which it shouldn't take you that long to become experienced enough as an Amano shrimp keeper to where you'll start just recognizing by the shape of the shrimp itself if it's a male or female. You'll notice on this female, she has lines just above where all those eggs are. You'll see that the dots and dashes are connected to make really long dashes or almost like a solid line. So the females are going to have more of a line or long dashes to their markings. The males have more of a dot or a short dash to their markings. That's one way that you can tell the male from the female Amano shrimp. If you're not able to just look at them and tell, the females overall have a much different body shape than the males, and we'll look at that more with the yellow and the white Amano shrimp. But those dots and dashes are really a dead giveaway when it comes to your Amano shrimp. So if you're picking out Amano shrimp to start a breeding colony, maybe you want to start with wild types because they're more uh, easier to find locally and you're not wanting to ship some colored Amano shrimp yet for your project. Or maybe you just prefer the look of the wild type Amano shrimp over the sun orange, for example, or the yellow or the white. That's perfectly fine too. But this is how you would be able to tell if you're at the pet store. Maybe some of the Amano shrimp are younger, and so they haven't really developed the full female body shape as much yet, and it's harder for you to tell. So you're just going to look at the side of the shrimp again on this female, even though her dashes on her sides there are a little more spaced out. You see that there's more of a straight line to those dots and dashes along her side. So that's just one easy way to tell male from female Amano shrimp when it comes to the wild type or the sun orange. These are the two types of Amano shrimp that are currently available that have a pattern to them that we can actually look at. On this one in particular too, you'll see towards like almost right outside of her digestive tract, those dots and dashes really do form like a line because they're so close together. So that's just one easy way you can tell. Now let's look at next door here with this snow Amano shrimp. There's no dots or dashes. And one of the first videos to come out on colorful Amano shrimp, I believe it was in late 2024 or maybe early 2025. The producer of that video actually suggested that that was going to be the major downside of the new colorful Amano shrimp, was that no one would be able to tell a difference between male and female. Well, obviously here with that saddle, that's that white patch on the shrimp's back that's clearly visible. And also, obviously, the giant mound of eggs on that white Amano shrimp. It's very easy to tell the difference between a male and a female. And this goes for the yellow color too, which we'll look at next. But with these white Amano shrimp, they do have kind of a translucent, it's not exactly clear, but they've got a translucent color to their exoskeleton, and it is completely void of those dots and dashes. So you've got to be able to either identify that saddle or those eggs under the tail, or you have to get experienced enough to just be able to look at the shrimp and tell by the body shape of the shrimp if it's a male or a female. Now, the way you'll be able to tell easily by the body shape is think about all of those eggs under that female shrimp's tail. Her body needs to be taller. She needs to have more of a space under her tail than this male here, as an example, so that there's room for those hundreds, sometimes thousands of eggs to be stored up under her swimmerettes. So it really gives the male and the female Amano shrimp a much different body shape. So here's another male, and you'll notice the back half of his body, if he turns to the side, or we can look at this one up front, it has a more slim profile to the body, just a completely different body shape. Now, it may take you some time of owning a mono shrimp and some experience in watching your shrimp as they move around in your aquarium before you kind of get experienced enough to be able to just look at that and say, "Oh yeah, that's a male." But it won't take long, trust me. You'll find that you're able to tell the difference in these shrimp soon. And it's because of how much taller and typically larger these females are because of all those eggs. Now, the great part for us as shrimp keepers when it comes to identifying male and female Amano shrimp, the great part about it is they are very prolific breeders. And what that means is they're constantly breeding. So once your colorful or even wild type Amano shrimp are old enough to breed, the females will constantly be saddled or buried, meaning that there will be very obvious eggs either on the back of the Amano shrimp, back behind the head, or under the tail, like we see on this shrimp hiding up in this crypt here. I mean, that is very, very obvious that that's a female, right? There's no guessing when it comes to these shrimp what is a female, right? So let's move over to the yellows. The yellows have the same patternless design going on as those white Amano shrimp. But again, we notice that it's very, very easy to distinguish male and female when it comes to the lemon Amano shrimp because of that stark difference between the translucent, colorful body of the shrimp and all of the eggs stored under their tail and on their back. Very easy to tell. But again, in the instance that the shrimp are a little younger and they haven't yet started reproducing, here's one here that's a female. We can see all of those eggs on her back, but more importantly, since she doesn't have eggs currently, see how deep the body is, how tall it is from the top of her back down to the bottom of her swimmerettes. The males don't have all of that extra space under their tail where the swimmerettes sit because they don't need that room to store and juggle all of those eggs. So pretty easy to tell the difference. Now, as far as the ratio of how many male Amano shrimp do you want to have together, how many female Amano shrimp need to be in there, I can tell you that it really depends on what you want to do. So what I mean by that is for the average hobbyist, if you're just trying to breed a mono shrimp to get more Amano shrimp for one aquarium, you're probably only going to want to raise baby Amano shrimp once because from that one experience, even if you only use like a 1 gallon fish bowl to raise up your baby Amano shrimp, you're going to start with like hundreds and hundreds of shrimp. Now, in a 1 gallon bowl, you may only have 20 or 50 survive by the end of it just because it's such a small amount of water. But again, for one aquarium, how many Amano shrimp do you really need? Now, if you're going to be breeding Amano shrimp to supply a local store, maybe you've got dreams about selling Amano shrimp online and shipping them, you're going to want to have a lot of female Amano shrimp, right? But one thing you do have to think about when it comes to these colors is just like Neocaridina shrimp, mixing the colors of a mono shrimp is going to result in wild type offspring. Now, especially considering these different colorful morphs of a mono shrimp are fairly new and the genes are pretty fresh when it comes to these mutations that allow for example, the leucistic color of these Amano shrimp that are snow Amano shrimp. This is essentially a black eye albino shrimp. It has no pattern, no color whatsoever. But instead of having red eyes like a regular albino, this is a leucistic mutation, meaning that it still retains the black eyes, but does not have any color or pattern at all. So if you were to mix a male and female between a snow and a wild type of mono shrimp, it's not going to create a new color. It's simply going to create more wild types. And if you breed those babies together, a portion of them may be snow amano shrimp, but the actual genes for reproducing more snow amano shrimp are not going to be as strong in the subsequent um, generations. Now, again, these genes are still fairly new, so they haven't even been inbred as a morph of Amano shrimp for more than a couple years. So this is really one of the newest types of colorful pet shrimp available in the aquarium hobby. Now, what we see there is some action. Typically, when the males start jumping on the females like that while they're still buried, that's a pretty good sign that they're not too far off from releasing those babies. So, pretty interesting stuff there. But so, how many shrimp you start off with is really up to you as far as what your plans are with your project. I highly advise that you really do think about how many shrimp you want to end up with, because you don't want to find yourself in a position where you're just having trouble finding a place to put a mono shrimp. You know, you don't want to find yourself in a position if you don't have a lot of hobbyists that live around you locally and you're not really interested in shipping a mono shrimp. There's really no reason to raise the larva. So, what happens in that instance? Well, if it's just a shrimp tank, there's no fish in there at all. Eventually, after a couple days, if the baby Amano shrimp are not transitioned to saltwater, they're going to expire. They're going to die. When they die, the adult Amano shrimp will eat them. And I have never noticed any kind of spikes in nutrients or anything like that, even in these tiny little 2.5 gallon tanks from a female Amano shrimp or even two female Amano shrimp releasing a batch of babies that I don't collect. But at this point, what I do try to do is if I'm not going to utilize a hatch of Amano shrimp and I wake up one morning and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of baby Amano shrimp swimming around in an aquarium, I will collect those babies if I do not plan to transition them to saltwater, and I feed them to my nano fish. So if you've got a community aquarium set up with your Amano shrimp in there, that's happening already. And do you need to separate out your female and micromanage who gets what as far as the babies go if you're not going to raise them out? You might want to have, half of those Amano shrimp larvae get fed to one aquarium and half get fed to another aquarium. That's really up to you as the fish keeper or aquarist that's in control of your tanks. But one option is, again, to let the adults consume the larva. They typically do not consume the larva while the larvae are alive. I've spent a lot of time watching a mono shrimp, at least my mono shrimp, while the larvae are in there swimming around. And I've never noticed the adults try to prey upon those babies. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, it could happen, but I've never seen that happen personally. And I have spent a lot of time sitting and watching them to see if they do that because I wanted to make a video about it, but they don't, not in my experience. So, collecting the babies is something you can do, but as far as a ratio goes, obviously you need to have one male and one female. Now, this is not like guppies where the males are aggressive towards each other, or it's not like, if you have too many males in a confined space, they'll get territorial. The thing that you do have to consider when it comes to your ratio of male to female Amano shrimp is at that time when the female Amano shrimp become ready to mate, the males will often chase them around in the aquarium kind of relentlessly, trying to mate with them. And so that can be somewhat stressful for the Amano shrimp. Now, I've never seen an Amano shrimp release all of the eggs out of stress. That's not to say that it can't happen. I'm willing to bet if you take an Amano shrimp that's in 70-degree water and drop it straight into 80-degree water, it might release those eggs out of stress. If you take an Amano shrimp, and swirl it around or something and stress it out real bad, it might release the eggs. But I personally have not seen a female Amano shrimp just prematurely drop a batch of eggs because she's getting chased around a bunch by males. So in these 2.5 gallon tanks, the ratio that I use is I have 2 males and 3 females per 2.5 gallon tank. Now, if I was to plan out what ratio that I would like to use for my Amano shrimp breeding tanks for these adults, that's the ratio I would choose. Like if I was going to a pet store and I had the option to pick out my adult Amano shrimp out of the pet store's tanks and choose how many males I got and how many females I got. If I was going with 5 shrimp, I would do 2 males and 3 females. If I was going to have 6 shrimp, I would probably do 2 males and 4 females. Now, once I got over 6, I would probably try to get an additional male in there. But the reason why I would do 2 males is just in case something happens to one of them, or just in case when you buy them, both males aren't mature yet. I mean, that's really the only reason you would do that. Otherwise, you really only need 1 male. But it's really up to you. There's no set ratio of male to female Amano shrimp that you have to have. You can just buy your Amano shrimp. As long as you get more than a few, you will most likely get both male and female. Now, I got lucky when I ordered my original stock of adult Amano shrimp online because again, these colorful Amano shrimp are just not available at most local pet stores due to the very few humans on the planet that are currently raising colorful Amano shrimp larvae. They're just not available. So I had to order mine online, and I just got lucky enough that when I did order these colorful Amano shrimp, that I was able to get the ratios of 2 males and 3 females. I don't personally think that they did that at the um, Amano shrimp facility. I don't think they picked out males and females and put together a particular ratio to fill my order. I didn't ask for a specific ratio when I ordered the shrimp. I think I just got extremely lucky. But that is something, if you're looking to breed them, that is a reason why I would probably get at least 5, because most of these places are not going to sit and, comb through the shrimp. And even then, you're going off of that person's idea of what the males and the females look like. Now, most importantly, when it comes to these yellow Amano shrimp, I've found that they're only shipping these currently as juveniles. And when I say juveniles, I mean they were pretty small. It took me several weeks, if not over, I think it was close to 2 months before they were grown out enough to actually start reproducing. They were so small. And that's because the demand is way higher than the supply. They're selling them faster than they can breed them. So they're just shipping them at a smaller size. So when it comes to these yellow Amano shrimp, even if you were to ask to get males and females, it would be even harder for them to figure that out when they go to ship them from the facility. So that's something to keep in mind, is you probably want to start out with at least 5. Depending on the size of the aquarium that you're going to be putting them in, you may want to get 10 or maybe 20. But I would try to, in the colorful Amano shrimp, if you're going to be ordering them online, I would try to get at least 5. I think most places sell in a even 6-pack. So now once you've obtained your Amano shrimp, what can you do to try to make sure that you have the most success possible when you're breeding them? Is there something that I'm doing in particular to try to get the most babies or to try to get the best looking babies and stuff like that. I mean, really, it's as simple as it sounds. Whether you've got them in a setup specifically to breed a mono shrimp like I have here, which I do have in my aquarium right now with my wild type of mono shrimp, which is in this aquarium here. I do have some young celestial pearl danios in here. You'll see one under the sponge filter there. So I do have some fish with these wild type of mono shrimp, but I don't do anything out of the ordinary that you wouldn't normally do for a shrimp tank. I feed them shrimp food. I feed them fish flakes. I feed them powdered food. Sometimes I supplement with bloodworms. I've given them brine shrimp. They love to eat brine shrimp. So it's really just normal shrimp keeping. And the Amano shrimp breeding all on their own is just kind of a bonus of owning them. So I think there's probably some things you could do, like you could try to make sure the aquarium has good water parameters. Again, basic shrimp ownership. You could try to feed them quality foods and supplement with high protein food like bloodworms or high fat food like bloodworms. Again, basic shrimp ownership. Now, when it comes to the color, you're going to get stuck with whatever colors you get sent initially because these colorful Amano shrimp are just so rare currently. So if they ship you, in this instance here, this is the sun orange Amano shrimp. If you get some sun orange Amano shrimp in and some are lighter, some are darker in the orange coloration, or even some might be more red than others, it's just going to be the luck of the draw. But once you have that first batch of shrimp that you raise through their larval stage and they turn into actual juvenile shrimp in freshwater, at that point, as you watch them grow up, you can start to try to pick and choose the best color Amano shrimp. And the yellow is also a really good example of this as well. Some of these yellow shrimp have more of a translucent coloration to them, and some of them have more of a solid yellow color. So when it comes to the babies that you raise, obviously you would want to keep the most solid yellow adults together for breeding, and you would cull or remove, in other words, the less desirable colors. So if you want a solid bright yellow, you would take out any of them that are pale or that are more translucent, and you would replace them with offspring that are more of the desired color that you want. Again, this is just basic shrimp keeping, but the same methods you would use for other types of shrimp obviously apply to a mono shrimp as well. So let's look at some juvenile mono shrimp and I'll give you an idea of exactly what I'm talking about. So here we've got a few juvenile mono shrimp. This one is more of like a teenager, if I can get him on the camera before he runs off. So that's a fairly red version of the sun orange Amano shrimp. And it's not yet breeding size, but I would definitely say it's an older juvenile compared to some of the other ones that are in here. Now, once that shrimp gets to breeding size, if it's a darker red than one of my other shrimp, I would definitely swap it out or at least add it to the gene pool of the breeding stock. So I've got also some wild type Amano shrimp in here. And believe it or not, there's some things that you can look for with these wild type Amano shrimp to try to cull out or to increase in your subsequent colonies. So I'll try to find one. I think this one's actually a pretty good example here. What I've found with the wild type is some of them have a blue tint to them. And no, not when they're stressed out all the time. Some of them are very blue. Now, it's not anything like a blue dream neocaridina shrimp. It's more of a blue hue to the translucent part of the shrimp. But hey, if that's, something that you can selectively breed for, then by all means, you would do that. Now, I have noticed some of my mono shrimp looking like this. This little baby, I have no idea what's going on with the coloration. Could this be a new type of Amano shrimp? I don't know. I mean, I'm really having to zoom way in on this thing. So it's kind of hard to tell exactly, but it kind of looks like a sun orange Amano shrimp whose head area is more of a wild type coloration. And as this shrimp gets bigger, this may be, essentially it's a cull, meaning that it's not a desirable sun orange Amano shrimp. But this could be a brand new morph, a brand new mutation. That's how we've gotten the Neocaridina shrimp that we have in the hobby. Is every once in a while, one of them will be born that looks much different than other ones. So here's another example of a real tiny baby. Again, these are juveniles that have been transitioned from saltwater back into freshwater. And I know the focus is a little crummy here. I'm having to zoom way, way in just to get the picture that we're getting because it's so incredibly small. But that's another example of a sun orange Amano shrimp. Here's another one here. Or this one actually looks like, yeah, that's a sun orange. So what will happen with this particular baby Amano shrimp as it gets bigger? Is it this one or is it this one up here? That one. So what will that look like by the time that shrimp is an adult? Only time will tell. And if you're interested in creating new colors of Amano shrimp, the only way to do that is just to breed them. That's really the only way. And I guess more importantly, not just breeding them, but you've got to raise these babies. So let's talk about that part of it, okay? This is where most hobbyists find themselves, whether they want to breed Amano shrimp or not. What happens is they have Amano shrimp in their community aquarium, and one day they realize their Amano shrimp is heavily pregnant and it has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of eggs under its tail. And they start thinking about, well, how do you raise these baby Amano shrimp? Can I raise? Is it easy? Can I do it at home? And so they start watching the videos online and they end up finding out that you need something like this. This is a Amano shrimp grow out tank. And you can see inside there is a ton of baby Amano shrimp larvae that are growing out in this aquarium. And these are lemon yellow baby Amano shrimp. Every single shrimp in here is a lemon yellow Amano shrimp. So how do you get here? What do you need to do? Is it complicated? I'll guide you through that as we take a look into this grow out. This is a 10-gallon aquarium. It's not filled up all the way, so it's probably got about 7, maybe 8 gallons in there. You can see where the water line was. I had it about halfway filled up, anticipating the birth of these yellow Amano shrimp. Once I added the baby larvae in here, I filled it up a little bit more. But what I have here is simply salt water in a glass box. That's it. This is salt water that I created using RO water and instant ocean aquarium salt. When you buy your bag of instant ocean aquarium salt, there's instructions on the back of the bag that tell you how to mix it up. It'll give you a instruction on how much salt to put in per gallon of water. So you're going to do that calculation. You're going to take a measuring cup, or you can even weigh the aquarium salt. You're going to mix the salt and the water together. I like to use a wave maker. I find that using the wave maker mixes the salt up really well, and I can just plug it in and let it mix, and I don't have to manually do it. But you could use your hand. You could use a stick or a spoon. It really doesn't matter. You just want to mix the salt up until all of the salt is dissolved into the RO water. And once you do that, you're going to let your newly mixed aquarium salt sit for about 24 to 48 hours because it goes through a little bit of a pH spike as it settles. So you do need to age your newly mixed salt water. At that point, you're going to put it into your container. So you don't have to use a 10-gallon tank to raise your baby Amano shrimp. If you want to raise 1,000 Amano shrimp, I would highly suggest you use a larger aquarium, like a 20-gallon, maybe even a 40-gallon or bigger. But for me, using a 10-gallon aquarium, and then below here, I actually have a 5-gallon setup. I'm able to pull out hundreds of babies per hatch that make it through in this small of a water volume. Now, again, if I had more water in here, there would be more babies that were able to survive. But you don't want to overfeed this system to try to keep, every single baby alive because you're going to end up crashing it. So we're going to talk about that. But first, back to mixing up that water. So every single, at least most, maybe not every single, but most videos on YouTube is going to talk about brackish water. You have to have brackish water. That's just something that the hobby has kind of echoed for decades now. You do not use brackish water. You use full salt water. So again, you can pick up that instant ocean at your local fish store, local big box store, or if you're lucky enough that you've got a fish store near you that has saltwater tanks set up, you can use salt water from their water change of their full salt aquarium, a reef tank or just a regular saltwater tank. Now, obviously, you don't want to use water from a tank that has disease or has some problems, but if it's a healthy saltwater tank, by all means, use that wastewater because that waste that's going to be in there, your little baby shrimp can feed on it. They're filter feeders, just like a Daphnia or a brine shrimp. And that's one thing that you'll notice in here. I'll try to zoom in on it when I come across it, is I've even got a couple brine shrimp in here. There's actually one down in the corner here. That's an adult brine shrimp. Actually, I think it's a juvenile. But you can put brine shrimp in here and have brine shrimp swimming around with your Amano shrimp. See it trying to pick off algae from the walls of the aquarium? Now, I have not fed these babies today, so I'll demonstrate feeding them here in just a minute, but let's get through setting up this container. So it's got algae on the back wall. The complete bottom of this saltwater grow out is covered in algae. The sides are covered in algae. And this front glass would be covered in algae, but I cleaned it off so we could see in, right? How do you get that algae? It's very simple. You want to use a quality LED planted aquarium light. You don't want to just use one of those cheapy lights that just has white LEDs. You want a full spectrum planted LED aquarium light, and you just leave it on. Leave it on 24 hours a day. What that's going to do is two things. It's going to grow a lot of algae, and it's going to support a lot of Infusoria. Now, what is Infusoria? Those are tiny, tiny little organisms that live in your aquarium. You can kind of actually see them in the video here towards the top of the tank. It kind of looks like it's a film on the back of the aquarium until we zoom in and you see that some of it is moving around. I can show you a little better with a flashlight, but there's tiny, tiny little dots that are floating around in this aquarium. I think you can see it in front of the airline. Now, there is a biofilm on the airline as well, but let me see if I can get a little closer. So these tiny, tiny little dots in here, the Infusoria, you don't even have to know exactly what they are. I don't. They could be ciliates, they could be pure paramecium. There's a bunch of different things they could be, but they're naturally occurring. So there we go. Now you can see them in front of that airline. They're tiny, tiny little dots. You probably already have something very similar in your shrimp tank or maybe even in your community aquarium or your aquascape. Turn off the lights to your fish tank and shine a flashlight down into the fish tank, and you'll see these tiny dots. They're more prevalent in aquariums that have snails and shrimp. I'm not sure why. I think maybe because in fish tanks, the fish consume them. But I'm going to shine a flashlight down here and hit that light. And let me adjust the focus a little bit. And you'll be able to see right there. See how much of it's actually in there? I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of little tiny dots floating around. Now, from far away to the naked eye, these dots just look like cloudy water. Whenever you have a freshwater aquarium, or maybe saltwater, I'm not very experienced in saltwater aquariums other than these Amano shrimp grow outs. Maybe one day I'll get more into saltwater. But I can tell you on freshwater aquariums, when we first set them up, they get cloudy after a few days. That's what that cloud is they're tiny little living single-celled organisms. Now, I've tried to research in on exactly what kind of single-celled organisms I have in my tank. I didn't buy a culture online. I didn't go down to the fish store and buy a bottle of stuff. This is a tiny, tiny organism that simply appeared out of thin air, the same way that it happens in your freshwater tank. If you have a shrimp tank, I'm telling you, turn the lights off, turn a flashlight on, or use your cell phone camera, and you'll see the same stuff. What's also really cool is these larvae, when they're smaller like this, they are attracted to light. So it kind of makes a cool, like a lava lamp style effect here, which is actually pretty awesome looking. But they're attracted to light because those tiny organisms are also attracted to light. So it puts them where the food is. That's exactly what's happening right here. And what we're seeing is beautiful lemon yellow baby Amano shrimp larva. You won't see lemon yellow Amano shrimp larva anywhere else. I'm the only guy that's documenting this, but I don't want to be the only guy. I want you to start breeding yellow Amano shrimp too, or maybe snow Amano shrimp, or even if you start breeding wild type Amano shrimp. I would love that. I want to watch your videos on breeding Amano shrimp. I want to see how you do it. So I'm going to demonstrate how I feed these Amano shrimp. And the way that I do it is I've come up with my own powdered food that I feed my baby Amano shrimp. This is tiny, tiny powdered food. Now you can use fish food to feed your baby Amano shrimp. You can use shrimp food that you pulverize and just smash up until it's as small as possible. But the way that I want you to think about this is you're more or less culturing that small, tiny stuff you see floating around. You're feeding that just as much as you're feeding these baby Amano shrimp larvae. Those little tiny things floating around eat bacteria. And sure, some of them are eating bacteria that's breaking down the waste from these larvae, but they are going to need more food than that. So I feed them a powdered food mix that I've come up with, and it works really well. I've got a little bit of it on a simple makeup brush here, and I just tap it just like that. I'm actually tapping twice, and that's it. It's not any more complicated than that. And I do that once a day. Now, sure, every once in a while, I might forget and I might skip a day, or I might be out of it on a particular day. I might forget that I fed my Amano shrimp already, and I might feed them twice. But every time I feed them, that's all I do. I tap a little bit of powder onto the top of the surface of the aquarium, and I don't even mix it up. I don't try to mix it into the water. I don't pre-mix it with water and squirt it in. I literally tap a tiny amount of powdered food into the top of the aquarium once a day. So think about that. Think about the fact that raising these baby Amano shrimp larvae is simply taking an empty aquarium or an empty container, filling it with salt water that's a mixture of RO water and salt mixed to the instructions on the back of the bag of aquarium salt. Or you can use water change water from a saltwater aquarium. And once a day, you tap a tiny bit of powdered food onto the top of it. And to check and see if they need more food or less food, you can shine a flashlight in to make sure that there's a bunch of these tiny, tiny little single-celled organisms swimming around. You don't need to know the name of those tiny organisms. You don't need a microscope. You don't need to buy them at the pet store or order them online. When you set up your Amano shrimp larva tank and you turn that light on 24 hours a day, go ahead and start feeding it. Tap one tap of food in there once a day, and it won't take long. Once that food starts to decompose, the bacteria that appeared out of thin air to decompose that food, it's going to start attracting whatever these little tiny dots are. You can call them Infusoria, Paramecium, ciliates, who knows? That's it. No advanced biology degree, no advanced school on breeding Amano shrimp, no series of 4-hour long videos or anything like that. It's amazingly simple. So you can do this at home, I promise. You can probably do it better than I do it. Again, this is a 10-gallon aquarium. This is not a large aquarium. Some people consider the 10-gallon a nano tank. Now, I think that's a little far-fetched. I kind of feel like 10-gallon is more of a mid-size aquarium, but who cares whether it's a nano tank or not? It's a tiny fish tank, and it's not even filled up all the way. And there's a bunch of baby Amano shrimp that have been in here for weeks. The ones that you see are the survivors, and that's how many yellow Amano shrimp I'm going to end up with. Now, you could be the guy or the girl that figures out a better way to do it so that more shrimp than you see here survive. Because I'm telling you, I started out with like 1,000 of them. You could be that guy or girl that figures out the perfect mixture of food to feed your baby Amano shrimp tank. I promise, if I can do this, you can probably do it better than I do. So this is the lemon yellow baby Amano shrimp larva grow out tank again that I've had going now for several weeks. I haven't had any problems at all with it, with this particular batch. What I can tell you is that when I first started doing this, I was not running the light 24 hours a day. I think what happened was we actually lost power. And when my light powered back up, it stayed off for a couple days before I realized it. And I did have a die off. And I believe that it had something to do with the die off of those little tiny things in there. But to be honest, I have no idea. And that was the only time I have personally had any issues whatsoever raising these mono shrimp larvae. Now, that being said, let's talk about what the other channel or the other tutorial out there is going to tell you you need to do to raise your mono shrimp. And I'm not saying they're wrong, but what I am saying is that I'm not doing those things, and I'll explain to you why I don't do those things. I'll explain to you what they are and why I do not do them. So whether you've seen the other videos out there on raising mono shrimp or not, this will help prepare you for the difference between the method that I use and the method that you'll see elsewhere. So the first big thing that I do not do is I do not worry about my shrimp touching the bottom of this aquarium. That's one of the weirdest parts of the other method out there of breeding Amano shrimp that I completely disagree with. I mean, we look down at the bottom of this aquarium, look at all those shrimp on the bottom. Those are, I probably should have mentioned this before, but the ones that you see swimming around yet, any day now, they're going to start transitioning to look more like this. These are the Amano shrimp that have grown big enough to kind of turn into shrimp enough to start clinging to surfaces. So they're not on the sides of the aquarium right now. They're on the bottom of the aquarium. But you'll notice on the back wall of the aquarium back here, if I can get it to focus in back there, there are some that are on the sides of the aquarium. I said that, but I can't. There's one up here. Yeah. Where is it? Okay. So see this guy right here. Let me get my finger. Where's my finger? Okay, right above my finger. See that one? He's on the wall of the aquarium. He's not swimming around. Now he's swimming. Nope. Yeah, that one right there. See that one right there? Those baby Amano shrimp are no longer like little larvae. Now, why are they bigger than, say, that tiny one right there that still looks like a squiggly line that's swimming around in the current? I have no idea. They grow at different rates. Every single shrimp in here was born on the same day. So why are some of them walking around on the bottom of the aquarium right now and some aren't? I have no idea. We don't need to know. That's one of the great parts about doing this is we don't need to know. But what we do know is that out of all the shrimp that you did see, there's probably twice as many of them here at the bottom of the aquarium feeding on algae, which is crazy when you consider that the main videos that were available up until I started doing this on breeding Amano shrimp, they warn and they even beg you to keep your baby Amano shrimp from touching the bottom of the aquarium. They claim that the moment that your baby Amano shrimp touches the bottom of the aquarium, well, there's bacteria down there that are just going to attack your shrimp. It's not true. What happened most likely to that other creator is he had a major die-off of his larva, and the larva probably sank down to the bottom of the aquarium and they were probably consumed by bacteria. And most likely what that creator noticed was those tiny Amano shrimp larvae being consumed by the bacteria. And he just assumed that that's what killed his Amano shrimp. But my Amano shrimp babies hang out on the bottom of the aquarium all the time. They're constantly in contact with the bottom of the aquarium, and no bacteria is attacking them. No bacteria is killing them. And to be honest, from this stage here, once they start actually hanging out on the bottom, like we'll try to get a little closer here. I don't know how close I can still focus in. But so these shrimp that are hanging out on the bottom, they're not swimming backwards anymore, but they're still walking backwards, a lot of them. And this is kind of like the last stage before they'll start moving forward like regular shrimp. Some of them you might see here and there start to move forward. Like there's one kind of in the middle there that's moving forward. From here, they'll start hanging out more and more on the sides of the aquarium and sometimes on the front of the aquarium. Like this one here is, let me turn this up a little bit. But this one here is still swimming, but he was also still hanging out on the side of the aquarium. See how he's going and touching the side of the aquarium to feed off the algae on the side? So as they get bigger, they start to look and act more and more like Amano shrimp. And so the question is, how do you know when they're ready to come out? How do you know when the Amano shrimp are fully evolved or developed from being tiny little babies to being ready to come out? This is another part, just like telling the male from the female Amano shrimp, that in the beginning, you're going to be really worried about every little detail. And after a couple batches of shrimp, you'll just be able to look in and casually say, nope, not ready. Yep, that one's ready. So this is another thing that creates a little confusion with some of those pre-existing how-to videos or tutorial videos on breeding Amano shrimp that contrast with how I do it. And what I mean by that is those videos are going to tell you that your baby Amano shrimp larvae are going to be red colored, and once they become clear, they're ready to come out. All of these baby Amano shrimp are yellow. There's not a single red one in here. So you can't go off of that with yellow Amano shrimp. You've got to be able to look at the shrimp and tell once they've turned into actual shrimp. Now, there's ways you can do it with a microscope where you look real close at them and you try to figure out exactly what their legs look like and all this other complicated stuff. I don't do that. What I do is I just wait for the Amano shrimp to look less like larvae and more like adult shrimp. And once they reach a certain point, the insides of the shrimp become solid colors. The bottom half of the shrimp is kind of a two-toned a little bit on the wild type Amano shrimp or even on the sun orange Amano shrimp. Once they become completely clear, you can move them over to the freshwater. But with these yellow ones, it's really impossible to go off of color. So you've got to just be able to look at them and tell. Now, here's the great part about it. This is the part that you're going to be happy to find out about. There's no rush to take these Amano shrimp out of the saltwater. What I mean by that is as soon as they mature into baby shrimp and they're ready to come out, there's not like a certain amount of days that you have to move them out by. It's not like if you don't move them out within a week, they die. You can keep them in the saltwater for weeks after they're ready to come out. The main thing that I caution you on is what I have personally found in my experience raising these tiny Amano shrimp larvae is that the longer you wait after they have fully developed into baby shrimp, the longer that you wait to take them out, the slower you need to transition them. So if the shrimp have just recently become big enough to be removed and put back into freshwater, and it's only been a few days or maybe even a week, in my experience, I have not seen much loss or deaths dropping them straight into freshwater. No transition, no drip acclimatization, no nothing. Just taking them out of this and putting them straight into freshwater. I haven't noticed any significant amount of loss. But if I have a batch that it's been like a month and I still haven't taken them out of salt water yet and they've molted a couple times as regular shrimp and they're starting to really get big, if you transfer them immediately into fresh water, I see a lot more loss that way. So what I do is I just put them in a shallow container. I use a little fluval breeder box and I add 1 squirt of fresh water from a turkey baster every couple of hours. I'm not drip acclimating them on some rigid schedule. There's no certain amount of hours you need to use. I just, over a period of 1 to 2 days, I just squirt some fresh water in there. That's it. There's no hard set amount of time or levels of salinity that you need to abide by, because remember, in nature, these shrimp are slowly making their way from the ocean or the bay all the way back up these rivers and tributaries back up to the areas where the adults are. And it may not be the same river or stream that they're going back up. And the current may be higher or lower. So it may take them more or less time. But I have found, that is one tip that I'll give you, is the older the shrimp is from the point that it's ready to come out, once you get past like 3 or 4 weeks, you definitely want to take your time in moving them over. Now, for you, you may notice it works a little differently. I can tell you what works for me and my setups with my experience, but you won't fully know until you actually start doing this. So don't think that there's some set playbook that you have to study and really follow rigidly, because if that was the case, everything that I'm doing here would be impossible because I'm not using phytoplankton. I'm not using rotifers, and all of my shrimp are hanging out down on the bottom of the aquarium with all that bacteria. So according to the guys that came before me, this is impossible, right? So you've really just got to get your foot in the door on breeding these shrimp. You'll notice also all of that powdered food, not all of it, but a majority of that powdered food still floating around at the top there. Again, I don't worry about mixing it in. Now, I've done this for a long time without using an air stone. You don't need to use an air stone. Now, that being said, if the temperature of the room that you're going to have this grow out in is really high, the warmer the water, the less oxygen is going to be in the water. So if you notice all of your baby Amano shrimp are up towards the top, you probably need to add an air stone, but I haven't noticed a need for an air stone. And I have regular room temperature throughout the year. My room temperature here fluctuates between about 70 degrees and 78 degrees. Now, that being said, why do I have an air stone? Well, what I've noticed is that I get algae growth on the very top surface of the aquarium. You'll see a little tiny piece of it right here. And this little algae, if I don't have that air stone running and the top of the water is just stagnant, it starts to grow in patches across the top of the surface of this aquarium. It doesn't hurt anything, and I believe the baby shrimp actually eat some of it. But when I go to harvest these shrimp, that algae gets all over my net, and I end up getting it in the freshwater that I'm transitioning to, and then it ends up in my freshwater aquariums. And believe it or not, some of this algae can survive just as well in freshwater as it does in saltwater. So I really have tried to cut down on the amount of algae that's growing on the surface of my aquarium by using that air stone. And what you notice here on the top is that I actually have a deli cup lid. I don't know if I'm going to be able to focus through the condensation there. Let me open up the lid. So I have the lid of a deli container that is just blocking those bubbles so that when the bubbles pop, they don't get salt all over everything. It's not wanting to focus. There we go. So that's what that is. If you were noticing that from the bottom view here and thinking, what is that white thing right there? It's just the lid of a deli container. And I took a pair of scissors and I cut the ridge off of the outer diameter of that lid so that it doesn't collect a bunch of water on top of the lid, because that kind of makes it sink a little bit. So by just making it perfectly flat, the water rolls off back into the aquarium if it accumulates any water on the top of it, and it stays on top of the water like that. And it just blocks those bubbles, because those bubbles, um, they'll get salt on stuff when it dries. And it's just annoying. Again, it doesn't hurt anything, but I try to do the steps that I do take when I breed fish or when I breed shrimp like this. Anytime you see me putting in effort, it's either because if I don't, it dies, or it's because it's saving me time later. So by having this air stone in here, originally I didn't add one because it was just one more thing to worry about. But once I noticed the issues I was having with the algae on the surface, I added it so that it would save me time in the long run. Now, let's talk about phytoplankton. I was going to bring this up earlier and I got off subject. So let's talk about why I do not use phytoplankton in my mono shrimp growouts. So these shrimp in the wild, they do eat some phytoplankton. They also eat some Infusoria, which is what we're feeding them. But what's important for you to know about filter feeders like this, or like Daphnia or brine shrimp, is they don't control what they eat. Anything that fits ships, right? So if it fits in their mouths, they're probably going to consume it. And so because of that, you don't have to feed these baby Amano shrimp with phytoplankton or with powdered algae. Matter of fact, when it comes to the powdered food that I feed my baby Amano shrimp, I specifically do not use chlorella powder because it's very heavy and it just sinks down to the bottom of the aquarium and it makes a mess. So with phytoplankton, with live phytoplankton, which is the saltwater version of green water, if you don't have your air stone in there on boil, it's not going to stay suspended in the water. It's not going to float around in the water without current. And so if I was to add phytoplankton without an air stone, possibly even in this system, because the air stone's barely on, there's really not a lot of circulation in here. If we focus in a little bit on that movement of the larva, you'll see they're not getting blown around by the current. They're still able to swim around as they choose in here. So I don't even know if this air stone would be enough to keep phytoplankton suspended in this aquarium. But so why don't I use phytoplankton? The first reason why is because you have to culture it outside of the aquarium. Even if you're able to perfectly keep your phytoplankton suspended in this aquarium, the cultures are not infinite. They don't last forever. Eventually, every phytoplankton culture will crash. So you have to culture it outside of the aquarium. That doubles the amount of work. It doubles the amount of aquariums or containers that you need to do this project. And in most cases, people don't just use one culture of phytoplankton. Then you need a backup culture in case your main culture crashes. Some people go as far as to have a backup to the backup. Then on top of that, they'll have cultures that are started at different times. So they'll have one culture and then they'll start another culture 2 weeks later. All of that is unnecessary by simply allowing these baby Amano shrimp larvae to feed off those tiny microscopic organisms that we see swimming around in here. You don't need phytoplankton and all of these little tiny dots swimming around. You don't need both. And my setups prove that. So I don't use phytoplankton because it's a lot more work. But here's another reason why I don't use phytoplankton in here. It's because the phytoplankton will get so thick and so green that you can no longer see your baby Amano shrimp. When you go to look into your Amano shrimp setup to grow out your baby Amano shrimp, it'll be impossible to see through the phytoplankton at some point. The only way to combat that is to do big water changes. And even then, you're just resetting the clock. But with these tiny larvae in here, water changes are something that you probably don't want to deal with because the larvae are very small. And you're going to have to take special care to not accidentally remove them when you're doing the water change. The other thing is you're not going to, at least I don't want to be constantly mixing up salt water. So instead of allowing the phytoplankton to get so thick that you can't even see in to check on your baby Amano shrimp, what those other methods require you to do is culture now a third container of things, or maybe even fourth or fifth if you've got multiple phytoplankton cultures. And that is something called rotifers. Rotifers are little organisms that eat the phytoplankton. So what they're telling you to do in the other videos is culture rotifers and phytoplankton, and then only at a specific time, not too late, but not too early, you have to introduce the rotifers in here so they can start eating the phytoplankton so it doesn't get too thick. But you don't want the rotifers to eat all the phytoplankton, but you don't want the phytoplankton to get too dark. It's all just confusing, it's complicated, and it's intimidating for most people because it sounds like a full-time job. So instead of doing any of that. I'm just over here tapping a couple little tap-tap-taparoos of powdered food in here. And I'm letting all those tiny little dots that are floating around that appear out of thin air do all the heavy lifting for me. I'm letting my shrimp, if they choose, hang out on the bottom of the aquarium. I'm not trying to constantly keep them away from the bottom of the aquarium with tons of rolling aeration from multiple air stones. I don't do any of that. Now, you can do that if you want to do that. I'm not against raising Amano shrimp using those methods, but I haven't found that it's necessary to do. And that's just my own personal experience raising Amano shrimp larva the way that I found to do it. So it's really going to come up to the individual aquarist on how much time and effort you want to put forth into your breeding setups. But here we see that same type of floating Infusoria. This is one of the adult Amano shrimp freshwater tanks. And if we look closely, you can see that it's full of Infusoria. Now, I definitely think that this is most likely a different kind of Infusoria than what's in the saltwater. According to what I've read via Google search, it's most likely ciliates in the saltwater. Now, is that true? I have no clue. It could be the exact same stuff. But what I'm telling you is I didn't go out and buy these little tiny dots. I didn't need to order them online. They just appeared in this aquarium out of thin air to consume the bacteria that's in here. And specifically on these adult Amano shrimp breeding tanks, I'm not in here removing detritus from this aqua soil because it makes a mess. So I'm letting the detritus that's in here naturally from these Amano shrimp, which you can imagine, each one of these 2.5-gallon tanks has 5 adult Amano shrimp and a couple small Neocaridina shrimp. So there is poop being produced in these tanks like 24/7. And, it's a fairly moderate amount of waste being produced. So I'm just relying on the bacteria to equalize to a level that it's able to take care of that. And then on top of that, these Amano shrimp, even as adults, they eat that infusoria and bacteria that breaks down the poop. So, to a layman or to inexperienced people in the hobby, or even some wives' tales out there that shrimps in your aquarium will eat poop, it's not the poop that they're eating, it's the stuff that's breaking that poop down that they're hunting. You'll often see your Amano shrimp, especially in a bare bottom aquarium. You'll see them picking up the little pieces of poop and just twirling it around like corn on a cob and then throwing it to the side. And it's because they're eating the biofilm off of the poop. And that biofilm is breaking that waste down. So breeding Amano shrimp is something that's incredibly easy to do. The first half of it that gets you to this point where you've got a female Amano shrimp that's just chock full of hundreds, if not thousands of eggs under her tail, well, that part is all automatic. And so as the breeder, all you need to do is those simple steps that I talked about to set up your Amano shrimp breeding larval raising or larval grow out tank by mixing up the salt water according to the instructions on the back of the bag, or maybe contacting your local fish store or a friend you might know with a saltwater aquarium and getting a couple gallons of salt water from a water change. And you're well on your way to raising the baby larva. Anyone can do it. You don't need to be an experienced shrimp keeper or an advanced shrimp keeper. And I don't have a doubt in my mind that someone that's never owned shrimp before can very easily get into breeding Amano shrimp because, again, the shrimp take care of the complete first half of the process for you. The instructions for preparing the aquarium for the larva are on the back of the bag of salt, and they're so easy that a child could do it. And then from there, you just have to tap in a little bit of very finely powdered food once a day or almost once a day and check to make sure those little tiny dots are swimming around. That's it. It's amazingly simple. And I really do hope and wish that starting this year, breeding Amano shrimp, but more specifically, raising Amano shrimp larvae to adulthood becomes the new normal. Because I think that lots of parts of fish keeping become impossible in our minds based on information from echo chambers, not from experienced individuals who have actually tried to do certain things. But a lot of what we end up thinking is hard to do or maybe even impossible to do in our aquariums, we don't ever actually try to do those things. And so I really hope that starting off 2026 with a lot of videos showing my success and even some of my failures with these projects will help to motivate you the next time you see a pregnant Amano shrimp in your aquascape or your community aquarium. You've got some desire to raise them into beautiful little Amano shrimp, just like this. Because again, I always say this, but it's so true. If I can do this, there's a pretty good chance that you could do it better than me. But we'll never know if you don't try. So if you haven't yet, make sure you check out my channel. I've got a lot of different playlists on breeding Amano shrimp and raising those larvae. And I really hope to bring more projects to you, doing some things with these aquariums that has never been documented before. And I really think that it's going to be an adventure and it's going to open up a lot of people's minds as to just how easy fish keeping can be as long as you're motivated and you have a desire to keep your fish healthy and you tune out the echo chamber that's always going to be there to tell you that it's too hard or that you don't have enough experience, or maybe just for the sake of trying to stay on the educational side of the algorithm, they make it sound more advanced than it actually is. So who knows? Maybe we'll end up breeding some fish that have never been bred before in a home aquarium. Maybe we'll be the ones to come out with a brand new color of Amano shrimp, like the world's first solid red or maybe solid green or even solid blue Amano shrimp. But the only way to get there is for you to try. So I hope this motivates you to get you on the road to breeding Amano shrimp, and make sure to leave it in the comments if you do. Although I keep the space under my videos clean, I do see all the comments and I appreciate everyone's support in this project. So again, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, share this video, and we'll see you in the next one.